Montana Territory, early August, 1873. The sun was just beginning to sink behind the Absaroka Range, streaking the sky with gold and rust, when Fletcher Boone spotted them, a girl barely grown, standing at the edge of the dusty road with a rifle over one shoulder and two boys clutching her skirts. He pulled his wagon to a slow stop. The dry wind rustled the prairie grass, and the wheels creaked as they settled in the dirt. The girl stepped forward, her chin high, but her eyes wary. The boys, one maybe 10, the other not more than 6, stayed behind her, their small faces drawn and dust-covered. "You headed somewhere?" Fletcher asked, keeping his hands visible on the reins. The girl glanced at the boys, then back at him. "South, as far as we can get before dark." Fletcher looked around. Miles of nothing but open land and coyotes between here and the next town. "You planning to walk it?" "We have to," she said, voice tight. "We do not have anyone left." He studied her. Her boots were cracked, her dress threadbare at the hem. She had a strength about her, but her shoulders were trembling under the weight of pretending she was not scared. "Climb in," Fletcher said, nodding at the wagon. "You are not going nowhere alone." The girl hesitated, then gave a small nod. She hoisted the youngest boy into the back, helped the older one up, then climbed in herself, rifle still slung over her shoulder. Fletcher clicked the reins and the horses started forward. He did not speak for a while. Let the rhythm of the wheels settle things. "I am Fletcher Boone," he said finally. "Willa Shepherd," she replied. "These are my brothers Waylon and Wendell." Willa, he tucked the name away. It suited her, strong and steady. "You from around here?" he asked. She shook her head. "We were headed to Red Lodge. Our father died last winter. Ma took sick 2 months ago, buried her last week outside a trading post near Fort Peck." Fletcher glanced at her. She was staring straight ahead, jaw set. "No kin left?" he asked. "None that will have us?" Fletcher nodded slowly. He had known that kind of loneliness, knew how it carved itself into a person. "Where were you going to sleep tonight?" "Wherever we could find water and keep watch." He gave a quiet breath through his nose. "There is a ranch a few miles west. My place. You all can rest there tonight. Got food, beds, a well." Willa looked at him then. Really looked. "Why help us?" "Because someone should have helped me when I was your age," he said. "And because you did not leave those boys behind." She did not say anything, but her hand found Wendell's and held tight. By the time they reached Fletcher's ranch, dusk had deepened. The house was a modest 2-room cabin, with a barn and a split-rail fence marking the property. He helped the boys down, then offered Willa a hand. She took it after a pause, her palm rough and warm. Inside, he lit a lantern, set out bread and beans, and poured water from the pump. The boys ate like they had not in days. Willa waited until they were full before picking at her own food. After supper, Fletcher pointed toward the back room. "You all take the bed. I will sleep out here." "You do not have to give us that," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I want to." She met his eyes, and something passed between them, uncertain but not unfriendly. The next morning, the boys were already outside chasing chickens when Fletcher stepped out. Willa was at the well, drawing water, her sleeves rolled, hair braided down her back. She looked up and gave a short nod. "You all slept all right?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." He leaned on the railing. "I meant what I said. You do not have to keep running. You are safe here." "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not. And those boys, they need more than just dirt roads and fear." She stared into the bucket, quiet. "I got land," Fletcher said. "Too much for one man to work alone. Could use help. You are welcome to stay if you want to." Willa looked back at him then. "You do not even know us." "I know enough." She studied his face. "And if we do stay, what then?" "Then we figure it out one day at a time." Willa did not answer right away. She turned toward the house, saw Waylon trying to lift a goat over the fence while Wendell giggled nearby. "We will stay," she said. "For now," Fletcher nodded. "Good." She looked at him again, longer this time. "Thank you." He tipped his hat. "Anytime, Willa Shepherd." And for the first time since he had met her, the corners of her mouth lifted just a little. The first frost came early that year, thin and silver on the fence rails come morning. Fletcher watched from the barn loft as Willa stepped outside, arms full of chopped wood, her breath visible in the pale air. She moved with purpose, but not hurry, balancing the load like she'd been doing it all her life. The boys were still inside, likely tangled in blankets and pretending to be asleep until the smell of biscuits drew them up. Fletcher climbed down and crossed to her. "There's more in the shed. You don't need to carry all that alone." "I ain't made of glass," she said, shifting the kindling higher in her arms. "Besides, it's my turn." He opened the cabin door for her without arguing. She passed through with a nod of thanks and he followed her inside. The warmth from the stove reached out like an old hand, and the scent of salt pork drifted from the skillet. Wendell sat cross-legged by the hearth, humming tunelessly as he carved a small horse from a chunk of pine. Waylon was at the table, chewing a pencil and frowning over a scrap of paper. Fletcher set his hat on the peg. "You figuring out your letters?" Waylon didn't look up. "Trying to." Willa poured water into a tin cup and slid it toward the boy. "He had a teacher back in Missouri. I'm trying to keep him going." "You read too?" Fletcher asked her. "Enough to get by." He watched her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've got an old primer in the trunk. Belonged to my mother. You're welcome to use it." "That'd be a help," she said, then added, quieter, "We didn't carry much when we left." Fletcher nodded once. "You've done well, all things considered." She looked at him then, not with pride, but with something softer, like she was letting herself believe it might be true. Later, while the boys were out helping fetch water from the creek, Fletcher brought down a saddle that needed mending. He set it on the porch railing beside Willa, who was darning a pair of socks with tight, practiced stitches. "You ever work leather?" he asked. She didn't look up. "A little. My father made harnesses." He handed her a small awl. "Stirrups loose." "If you're willing." Willa adjusted the saddle in her lap, fingers moving with care. "You don't mind me fixing your gear? If I minded, I wouldn't have handed it to you." She glanced at him, then back to her work. "Most men wouldn't. I'm not most." A silence settled, not uncomfortable. The sound of Wendell laughing by the creek carried on the wind, light and quick. "You always live alone?" she asked after a while. He shifted, sat on the top step. "Since I was 16. She didn't press, but her eyes flicked toward him once. "That's young. My pa died in a mine collapse." Ma followed not long after. "I didn't see much point in sticking around where everything reminded me of what I lost." Willa nodded, sewing needle paused mid-stitch. "I understand that." He looked at her then, the way her hands kept steady even when her voice thinned. "You ever think about staying put?" She didn't answer right away. "I've thought about what it might feel like to not always be weighing where to go next." He let that sit between them. Then, "You don't have to decide anything yet." She tied off the thread, smoothed the leather flat. "I know. But I think the boys would like it here." He watched her hand rest briefly against the saddle horn, her thumb brushing the worn edge. "And you?" Willa stood, handing the repaired tack back to him. "I'm still thinking." He took it, their fingers brushing. "That's fair." That night, after the fire had burned low and the cabin had gone quiet, Fletcher stepped outside. The stars were sharp over the plains, the kind that made a man feel both small and lucky to still be breathing. He heard the door creak behind him and turned. Willa stepped out barefoot, arms crossed against the cold. "Can't sleep," he shook his head. "Never could on nights like this." She stood beside him, close enough that her arm brushed his. "It's quiet here," he nodded. "That's the part I like best." Willa looked up at the sky. "I used to think silence meant something bad was coming." Now I'm not so sure. He glanced at her profile, how the starlight caught on her cheekbone. Sometimes quiet just means peace. She didn't respond, but she didn't move away either. Fletcher spoke again, low. You ever want to learn how to ride better, I can show you. Got a mare gentler than most. Willa smiled, small and tired and real. I'd like that. And for the first time since she'd stepped into his wagon on that empty road, there was something in her voice that sounded like hope. The mare's name was Juniper, a calm-eyed sorrel with a soft mouth and a liking for apples. Fletcher brought her up from the lower pasture late one morning 2 weeks after Willa and the boys had settled in. The sun hung low in a pale sky, and the wind had turned sharper, carrying a scent of snow from the mountains. Willa stood at the paddock fence, sleeves rolled, a small scratch along her knuckle from mending a splintered gate post. She lifted her eyes as he led the mare close. "She yours?" she asked. "Bought her off a Dakota trader 3 winters back," Fletcher said, looping the reins over the fence. "She don't spook, don't bite. Thought she might suit you." Willa watched the horse for a breath, then stepped forward and offered her palm. Juniper sniffed, then nudged it gently. Willa's lips parted, not in a smile exactly, but something near to it. "I've only ever ridden bareback," she said, running her hand along the mare's neck. "And not often." "I'll walk beside you," Fletcher said. "We'll go slow." Waylon and Wendell had gone with a neighbor's boy to help gather firewood from the cottonwoods down by the creek. That left the yard quiet, the kind of quiet Fletcher had grown used to, but that now felt less like solitude and more like waiting. He steadied Juniper while Willa mounted, her skirts bunched at the knees. She moved careful but not timid. Once seated, she looked down at him, one hand resting on the horn, the other gripping the edge of the saddle. "Tell me if I lean too far." "I will," Fletcher said, stepping in close to lay his hand over hers on the rein. "Ease back when you want her to stop. A little pressure with your kneel guide her." They rode in silence at first, Fletcher walking at Juniper's shoulder. The trail followed a shallow ridge, dried grasses swaying on either side. A magpie burst from a sagebush ahead and took off into the wind. Willa's posture stiffened, but she didn't flinch. "You're doing fine," Fletcher said. After a while, she asked, "Did you ever think about leaving?" "Starting over somewhere else." He kept his eyes on the trail. "Used to, thought about California once, or maybe Kansas, but the land here, it doesn't let go easy." Willa looked out toward the distant hills. "I never stayed anywhere long enough to miss it after." "You ever want to?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned forward and ran her hand down Juniper's neck. "I think I'm starting to." They reached the top of a low rise. Below, Fletcher's barn roof caught the light and smoke curled steady from the chimney. Willa pulled Juniper to a stop, her chest lifting with the breath she took. "Feels different from up here," she said. "How so?" "Like I might belong somewhere," she said, voice quiet. "It used to scare me to think about that. You're not the only one." Fletcher stepped closer, meeting her gaze. "But you don't have to be afraid here." She stared at him, something unspoken flickering behind her eyes. Then she nodded once, slow and sure. That evening, Fletcher found a box in the storage loft. Inside were old sewing notions, a chipped china bowl, and the primer he'd mentioned. He brushed dust from the cover and brought it inside. Willa was kneeling by the hearth, showing Wendell how to stack kindling in a crisscross. Waylon sat near the table, his legs swinging as he peeled an apple with a pocket knife. Fletcher set the book beside her. "Found the primer. Might help Waylon with his writing." She looked down, ran her fingers over the worn cover. "Thank you. Got some old paper too, if he needs it. I'll see he uses it proper." He watched her tuck the book beneath her arm, cradling it like something valuable. Not because it was rare, but because it meant a way forward. Later, after the boys had gone to sleep, Willa stepped out to the porch where he was cutting strips of rawhide. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice carrying in the crisp air. He looked up. "We could plant potatoes come spring. That patch behind the shed gets sun most the day, and Waylon's strong enough now to help dig rows." Fletcher nodded slowly. "That'd be good." She stepped closer, her hands folded, the lamplight from inside casting a glow across her collarbone. "I'm not saying we owe you," she said. "But I want to give something back, not just for a bed and bread, for all of it." "You already do," Fletcher said. "You being here, that means more than you know." Willa's brow furrowed, not in confusion but because she was weighing something carefully. "I didn't expect to find this," she said. "Not out there on the road, not in a stranger's wagon." "You weren't just anyone," he said. She took a breath. "I know that now." Their eyes held steady, and there was no need to fill the space with anything else. Not yet, not when the truth between them was beginning to take root. By late October, the days shortened fast. The wind came down off the Beartooths colder than before, rattling the cottonwood leaves like bones. Fletcher had patched the barn roof ahead of the first snow, and Willa had finished stitching heavy curtains from old flour sacks to hang over the cabin's windows. The boys helped wherever they could, Waylon learning to split kindling clean, Wendell trailing behind with an armful of scraps and questions that never quite ended. That afternoon, Fletcher returned from the far pasture with 2 grouse slung over his shoulder and a streak of dried blood across one knuckle. Willa was kneeling by the milk cow, hands steady on the pail, her hair tied back with a strip of muslin. When she stood and wiped her palms, he held up the birds. "You ever dress grouse?" She lifted an eyebrow. "If you've got a sharp enough knife." He handed her one from his belt and set a board on the porch rail. She worked in silence for a time, the blade moving with practiced flicks. Fletcher leaned beside her, watching the sun slope low behind the ridge. "You know," he said, "I was thinking come spring we could try cutting a channel from the creek, run it through that dry patch behind the barn." Willa didn't look up. "For irrigation," he nodded. "Could get vegetables going. Maybe even corn if it takes." She paused, then said, "You think this land can hold that much? It's held me this long." She finished with the bird, her fingers slick. "And you'd share the yield. I wouldn't be planting it without you." She rinsed her hands in the basin set near the steps, then dried them on her apron. "If we do that, we'll need to fence off the far end, keep the mule from trampling it. I've got extra posts in the shed." Willa met his eyes. "Then I reckon we've got a plan." That night after supper, Fletcher reached into the cabinet and pulled out a length of dark blue flannel. He set it on the table beside her sewing basket. "Was meant for a winter shirt," he said, "but I never got around to it." She unfolded the cloth. "This is fine wool. Why give it up? I thought maybe you could make something for yourself, if you wanted." Her fingers traced the selvage. "It's too much. It's not enough." Willa didn't speak for a long while. He let the quiet settle, not pressing. "Finally," she said, "I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop. That something would go wrong, that we'd have to leave. You don't have to wait any more." She looked toward the sleeping alcove where the boys lay bundled in quilts. "They've started calling this home. And you," her voice came softer than before. "I think I have too." Fletcher stood, then reached for the kettle. "Want some coffee? I'll help." They moved around the stove without speaking, their hands brushing once as they reached for the same tin cup. Neither pulled away. When the water boiled, he poured it slow, the scent rising between them. Willa cradled her mug, then glanced over. "Do you ever think about the kind of life you want? I think I'm living it." She leaned her hip against the table, steam curling past her chin. "Even before we showed up, no," Fletcher said. "Not like this." He stepped closer, not touching her, just letting the space between them grow warmer. "You've given this place a soul it didn't have before." Her eyes found his, and for a long moment neither of them looked away. "You mean that?" she asked. "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." She set the cup down and reached up, her fingers brushing the edge of his collar. "I don't know what comes next. We make it up as we go," he said quietly. Then she kissed him, slow and sure, like a promise. His hands found her waist, hers came to rest at the back of his neck. The cabin held its breath around them, and outside the wind carried on, steady and cold but no longer unwelcome. When she pulled back, she said, "I'm not going anywhere." Fletcher touched his forehead to hers. "Good. Because I was never going to let you face this world alone." By mid-November, the first snow clung low to the hills. Not deep, not yet, but enough to muffle the world and make the sky feel closer. Fletcher had started feeding the stock hay twice a day, and Willa had taken to smoking meat by the shed, bundling herself against the cold in a wool shawl she'd sewn from scraps. The boys spent their afternoons carving sled runners from spare wood under Fletcher's watch, their breath rising in plumes, laughter echoing off the trees. Inside the cabin, the walls had grown warmer not just from the fire, but from small signs of permanence. Willa hung a string of dried apple slices by the window. Waylon had drawn a map of the property in charcoal and pinned it beside the door. Wendell kept a row of pebbles lined neatly on the sill, each one named and remembered. One morning, while the sky still held a soft pink cast, Willa slid a plate of cornmeal griddle cakes onto the table. Fletcher was mending a length of harness leather nearby, eyes lifting when he caught the scent. "You been up long?" he asked. "Before the kettle hissed," she said, sitting across from him. "The wind woke me. It's shifting west." He nodded, setting aside the awl. "Weather's turning faster than usual. Might be a hard winter." Willa poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "You ever had someone to ride out a hard season with you before?" Fletcher took the cup, fingers brushing hers. "Not until now." A quiet passed between them. Not heavy, not uncertain, just full. Willa looked out the window. "The boys have been asking if we'll still be here come spring." He waited. "I told them yes," she said, "because I want to be." His hand rested flat against the table, open. Willa placed hers in it, palm warm, grip certain. That afternoon, while Waylon shoveled the path clear and Wendell chased a chicken who'd broken from the coop, Willa and Fletcher measured the back field with twine and stakes. They worked in rhythm, wordless but aligned, the kind of shared effort that didn't need explanation. At the final marker, she paused. "You ever think about building on?" Fletcher looked at her, the wool of her shawl caught in the wind. "You wanting more room?" "I'm thinking ahead," she said. "The boys'll need space of their own before long. And I wouldn't mind a corner for sewing that doesn't share a wall with snoring." He smiled, slow. "You plan the shape, I'll raise the beams." "I know a good frame when I see one," she said, eyes catching his. That night, Fletcher brought a cedar box down from the loft. He set it on the table, dusted it with the edge of his sleeve. Willa watched as he opened the lid. Inside were 2 silver rings, plain but well made. "My mother's," he said. "She wore one. My father the other. They kept them through everything." Willa reached forward, touched the edge of the band. "They were married long, till the end," he said. "They had their share of storms, but they held." She looked up. "You offering this for keeps?" "I am," he said. "Not out of duty, not because of the boys or the land. Because I love you, Willa. And I want to build the rest of my life with you." She picked up one ring, turned it between her fingers. "I wasn't sure I'd ever be asked like this," she said quietly. "Not on even ground, not by someone who sees me clear." Fletcher waited. She slid the ring onto her finger. "Yes." He took her hand, kissed her knuckles. "We'll say vows come Sunday. I'll ride to the next town at first light. Pastor Nishals'll make the trip. I'll sew a dress," she said, leaning into him. "And the boys can gather winterberries. They'll want to do something. They'll be proud," he said. "They already are." 3 days later, beneath the bare branches of the cottonwoods, Fletcher stood beside Willa as Pastor Nichols read the words slow and clear. The boys stood close, clean and wide-eyed, Waylon holding a small sprig of pine like it meant something, which it did. Willa's dress was simple, the blue flannel worked into a skirt that moved with the wind. Fletcher had combed his hair, buttoned his best shirt. When he took her hands, they were warm despite the cold. "You are my home now," she said, "and every day after. You're my heart," he replied. "Strong as the land that holds us." They kissed once, like they didn't need to prove anything, just seal what had already been built. The cabin filled with the scent of venison stew and the sound of Wendell's humming as dusk fell. Outside, snow began to fall in quiet flakes, covering the earth slowly, gently, like a blanket pulled up over a sleeping child. Years passed. The boys grew tall. Waylon went east for schooling one spring but came back every harvest. Wendell never left, taking to horses and fence lines like he'd been born to them. A second cabin rose beside the first, and Willa's vegetable rows spread wide enough to feed neighbors come lean seasons. Fletcher and Willa grew older, their hair silvering, their hands lined but strong. They kept their chairs by the hearth, kept their mornings slow and their evenings full of shared glances and quiet touch. They never left the land. They didn't need to, because love, when rooted deep and tended well, knows how to hold.